The road stretched long and quiet under the open sky, the kind of road that made a man think even when he did not want to. The cowboy had been riding since early morning, his horse moving at a steady pace, dust rising softly with each step. He was not a man who talked much, and he did not stop often. Towns came and went in his life like passing clouds. He stayed just long enough to rest, buy what he needed, and move on again. This town was no different, or so he thought. By the time he reached the edge of the town, the sun was already high. The buildings were old, made of wood faded by years of heat and wind. The street was quiet, almost too quiet, as if the town was holding its breath. A few people stood outside shops, but they did not talk much. They watched strangers carefully, the way people do when they have learned not to trust easily. The cowboy noticed this but did not slow down. He had seen many towns like this before. His supplies were running low, and he needed ammunition before heading back into the open land. The gun shop stood near the end of the street, small and plain, with a worn sign hanging above the door. The paint was peeling, and the windows were dusty. But the place looked solid, like it had stood there longer than most of the town. The cowboy tied his horse to the post outside and stepped down. As he reached for the door, he paused for a moment, listening. The inside was quiet. He pushed the door open and stepped in. A small bell rang softly above the door, breaking the silence. Inside, the shop smelled of old wood and oil. Shelves lined the walls, filled with boxes, tools, and items that showed signs of age and careful use. Everything was clean but old, kept in order by someone who cared. Behind the counter stood a woman dressed in dark, simple clothes. She looked up quickly when the bell rang, her eyes sharp and cautious. She was not young, but she was not old either. Her face showed signs of a hard life, lines shaped by worry rather than time. Her hands rested on the counter, still but tense, as if she was always ready for something to go wrong. When she saw the cowboy, her expression softened just a little. But the tension did not leave her completely. "Good afternoon," she said quietly. "Afternoon," the cowboy replied. His voice was calm and steady. He removed his hat politely and nodded. He did not smile, but there was nothing unfriendly about him. He was simply a man used to keeping his feelings to himself. "What can I help you with?" the widow asked. "I need some ammunition," he said. "Nothing fancy, just enough for the road." She nodded and turned toward the shelves behind her. As she moved, the cowboy noticed something strange. She kept glancing toward the door, then back at him, then toward the back of the shop. It was not obvious, but it was there. He had learned long ago to notice small details. Those details often meant the difference between trouble and safety. While she gathered the boxes, the cowboy let his eyes move slowly around the shop. There were photographs on the wall, old and faded. One of them showed a man standing proudly in front of the same shop, his arm around the woman who now stood behind the counter. The man's smile was strong and confident. The woman in the picture looked happier, lighter, like someone who believed the world was fair. "That your husband?" the cowboy asked gently. The woman froze for just a moment before answering. "Yes," she said. "He passed some years ago." "I'm sorry," he replied. "Thank you," she said, but her voice carried more pain than words. She placed the boxes of ammunition on the counter and named a fair price. The cowboy reached into his coat and paid without argument. As she counted the money, her hands trembled slightly. She tried to hide it, but again, he noticed. "You run this place alone?" he asked. "Yes," she answered. "Have been since he's been gone." "That's not easy," he said. "No," she replied. "It isn't." There was a silence between them, the kind that feels heavy rather than awkward. Outside, footsteps passed by the window. The widow's head lifted quickly, her eyes going to the glass. When the footsteps moved on, she let out a slow breath. The cowboy pretended not to notice, but his senses were alert now. This was not just grief. This was fear. As he picked up the ammunition, he noticed a small mark on the counter, like something had been moved often from the same spot. There were faint scratches leading toward the back. Again, A small detail, but small details mattered. You passing through? The widow asked, trying to sound casual. Yes, he said. Won't be staying long. Her shoulders relaxed just a little at his words. But the relief did not last. Another sound came from outside voices this time. Low, serious voices. The widow stiffened again. The cowboy placed the ammunition into his bag slowly, giving her time to compose herself. He could have left right then, and part of him knew that would be the smart thing to do. Passing through meant not getting involved. That was how he survived for so long. But something about the woman's fear, about the way she carried herself, made him hesitate. You look like someone expecting trouble, he said quietly. She looked at him, surprised. For a moment, it seemed like she might deny it. Then her eyes dropped to the counter. Trouble has been around here for a long time, she said. Some of us just learned to live with it. That don't make it right, he said. No, she agreed. But sometimes, it's the only choice. Another pause filled the shop. The widow glanced toward the back again, then leaned closer to the counter, lowering her voice. You should leave town before sunset, she said. It's safer that way. The cowboy studied her face. He could see she believed what she was saying. Is that advice? He asked. Or a warning? She did not answer right away. Instead, she reached beneath the counter and placed a small wrapped item near his hand. Her movements were careful, almost nervous. That's not part of what I paid for, he said. No, she replied softly. It isn't. He did not pick it up. What is it? Something that needs to leave this town, she said. And someone I trust hasn't come along in a very long time. He looked at her, surprised. You don't know me. I know enough, she said. You notice things most men wouldn't, and you didn't ask the wrong questions. The voices outside grew closer. The widow's eyes widened slightly. Please, she said. Take it. Just for now. The cowboy hesitated. This was not his burden. He had his own past, his own reasons for staying on the road and keeping his distance, but he also had a code, one shaped by years of living honestly in a dishonest world. Slowly, he took the wrapped item and placed it in his bag with the ammunition. He did not look at it. Not yet. I'll ride out slow, he said. If anyone asks, I bought ammo and nothing else. She nodded, relief and fear mixing in her expression. Thank you, she whispered. He placed his hat back on and turned toward the door. Before stepping out, he paused and looked back at her. You won't be safe if you stay here, he said. I've been here this long, she replied. I can last a little longer. The bell rang again as he stepped outside. The sun was still high, the street still quiet. But now it felt different. Eyes watched him from doorways and windows. He untied his horse calmly, as if nothing had changed. To anyone watching, he was just another traveler moving on. But as he rode away from the gun shop, the weight in his bag felt heavier than ammunition alone. Something had shifted the moment he walked through that door. A simple stop had turned into the beginning of something far bigger than either of them had planned. And though he did not yet know what secret he carried, he knew one thing for certain. His journey would not be as simple as it had been when the day began. The cowboy did not ride far before he felt the weight of what he was carrying settle into his thoughts. The road ahead looked the same as it always had, long, dusty, and open, but his mind was no longer calm. He kept his pace steady, not wanting to draw attention. Every sound felt louder now. The soft creak of the saddle, the slow breathing of the horse, the distant wind brushing against dry grass. He told himself to keep moving, to put the town behind him, but something held him back. After a short distance, he guided his horse off the road toward a cluster of low hills. From there, he could still see the town in the distance. He stopped near a group of rocks and dismounted. The horse lowered its head, grateful for the pause. The cowboy reached into his bag and pulled out the wrapped item the widow had given him. He studied it for a moment before slowly unwrapping it. Inside was a small leather pouch, worn smooth by years of handling. It was not heavy, but it felt important. He opened it carefully and found a folded bundle of papers and a thin metal object shaped like a key. The papers were old, their edges yellowed, covered in careful handwriting. He did not read them yet. Instead, he wrapped everything back up and placed it safely inside his coat, close to his chest. He sat on a rock and looked back toward the town. From a distance, it looked peaceful, almost harmless. But he knew better. He had seen places like that before. Places where silence hid deep problems. The widow's face came back to him, her fear, her quiet strength, the way she trusted him without really knowing him. That kind of trust was not given lightly. He stayed there longer than planned. Part of him argued that he should leave, ride hard until the town was nothing more than a memory. But another part of him knew that walking away now would leave the woman alone, with whatever danger followed that secret. He sighed and stood up, decision made, even if he did not yet fully understand it. Instead of riding away, he turned his horse back toward the town, choosing a slower path that stayed away from the main road. As he approached, he noticed movement near the buildings. A group of men stood near the general store, talking in low voices. Their posture was stiff, their eyes alert. These were not men enjoying a casual day. They were watching, waiting. The cowboy tied his horse near the edge of town and walked on foot, keeping his head down. He passed by without looking directly at them, but he could feel their eyes on him. One of them spoke, but he did not hear the words clearly. When he reached the gun shop, the door was closed. The sign said open, but the curtains were drawn. He knocked lightly. For a moment, there was no answer. Then the door opened just enough for the widow to see him. Her eyes widened in surprise and concern. "You shouldn't have come back," she whispered. "Maybe," he replied, "but I couldn't leave like that." She hesitated, then stepped aside and let him in. She locked the door behind him and leaned against it, as if holding herself upright took effort. "They're asking questions," she said. "They've been doing it for days now." "About what?" he asked, though he already had an idea. "About my husband," she replied. "About things that happened years ago. Things they want forgotten." She led him behind the counter and into a small room at the back of the shop. It was dimly lit and smelled of old paper and oil. A desk sat in the corner, covered with tools and notebooks. On the wall hung another photograph of her husband. This one more worn than the first. "He wasn't just a shop owner," she said, noticing his eyes on the picture. "People thought that's all he was. But he kept records. He believed in fairness. He believed that the truth mattered." She opened a drawer and pulled out an empty space where something had clearly been stored. "That pouch you're carrying," she said. "It holds proof." "Proof of what?" the cowboy asked. She took a deep breath. "Proof that some powerful people in this town built their comfort on lies. They took land, money, and futures from people who had no way to fight back. My husband found out. He wrote everything down, and that's why he died," the cowboy said quietly. She nodded. "They said it was an accident. Most people believed them. Some knew better but stayed silent. I kept the records hidden, waiting for the right moment. I didn't know what that moment would look like. I just knew it hadn't come yet." "Until now?" he asked. She met his eyes. "Until you walked through that door." Before he could respond, there was a knock. Harder this time. The widow froze. "Mrs. Hale," a voice called from outside. "We know you're in there. We just want to talk." The cowboy moved instinctively, positioning himself between the door and the widow. He kept his hands visible, his posture calm. "You don't have to answer," he said softly. But the widow shook her head. "If I don't, they'll break in. And that will only make things worse." She unlocked the door and opened it slowly. Two men stood outside. They were well-dressed compared to most of the town, their boots clean, their expressions polite but cold. "We noticed you had a visitor earlier," one of them said, glancing at the cowboy. "We were hoping to ask him a few questions." "I bought ammunition," the cowboy said evenly. "That's all." The man smiled, but his eyes did not match the expression. "Of course. We just like to be careful. This town has had its share of misunderstandings." The widow stood tall, though her hands trembled. "If that's all, I'd like to close early today." The men exchanged a look. After a moment, one of them nodded. "Of course. We'll be on our way." They left, but their presence lingered like a shadow. The widow closed the door again and leaned against it, her breath shaky. "They won't stop," she said. "Not now." "No," the cowboy agreed. "They won't." He thought for a moment, then spoke. "Those papers are their copies?" She shook her head. "No. My husband believed in keeping things simple. He trusted his hiding places more than duplication." "Then we need to move smart," he said. "That secret can't stay here. And neither should you." She looked at him, fear and hope mixing in her eyes. "Where would I go?" "Someplace they won't expect," he replied. "And someplace where the truth can be heard." She was silent for a long time. Finally, she nodded. "I trusted my husband. Now I'll trust you." The cowboy felt the weight of responsibility settle deeper. He had not planned for this. He had not asked for it. But some paths chose a man whether he was ready or not. As the sun began to lower, they prepared quietly. The widow packed only what she needed. The cowboy checked the streets through a small window. The men were still nearby, pretending to go about their business. When the time came, they stepped out through the back of the shop, moving carefully through narrow alleys and shadows. The town did not notice their departure, or perhaps it chose not to. As they walked away, the cowboy knew the danger had only begun. The secret he carried was no longer just a bundle of papers. It was a promise to a widow, to a man who had believed in truth, and to himself. The night air felt cooler as they moved farther away from the town. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a soft silver light over the open land. The cowboy walked a few steps ahead, leading the way with quiet confidence. The widow followed close behind. Holding a small bag with her belongings, she had left almost everything behind, including the life she had known for years. Each step away from the town felt heavy, but also strangely freeing. They reached the place where the cowboy had tied his horse earlier. He helped the widow climb onto the saddle first, then mounted behind her. The horse moved slowly at first, careful not to make noise. Once they were far enough from the town lights, the cowboy guided the horse into a steady pace. Neither of them spoke for a while. The silence was filled with thoughts. The widow looked back once, seeing the town grow smaller behind them. Her eyes filled with tears, but she did not cry. She had spent too many years holding her pain inside. Tonight, she focused on moving forward. After some time, the cowboy spoke. "There's an old road north of here," he said. "Not many people use it anymore. We'll follow that until sunrise." She nodded. "Do you think they'll follow us?" "Yes," he said honestly. "Not right away, but they will." That truth did not scare her as much as she thought it would. Fear had already been part of her life for too long. Now, at least, she was doing something about it. They reached the old road before dawn. It was narrow and rough, with tall grass growing along the sides. The cowboy slowed the horse and watched the land carefully. He was alert, listening for sounds that did not belong to the night. As the sky began to lighten, they stopped near a small group of trees. The cowboy helped the widow down and gave the horse some water. They rested quietly, sharing a simple meal. The widow looked tired, but there was a new strength in her eyes. "I never thought I'd leave like this," she said softly. "Most important choices don't give much warning," the cowboy replied. She looked at him. "Why are you helping me?" He thought for a moment. "Because once, a long time ago, someone helped me when they didn't have to. And because your husband believed in the truth. That matters." She nodded, understanding more than his words alone could say. They did not rest long. As the sun rose higher, the cowboy decided it was time to move again. They traveled through open fields and dry land, staying away from towns and main roads. By afternoon, they reached a small, abandoned farm. The buildings were old but still standing, hidden from the road by trees and tall grass. "We'll stay here for a bit," the cowboy said. Let the trail grow cold. They settled inside the old house. The widow sat at a small table while the cowboy checked the area around them. Everything seemed quiet, but he knew quiet did not always mean safe. As they waited, the widow finally asked about the pouch again. What will you do with the papers? She asked. We'll take them to someone who can make them matter, he said. Someone outside that town. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small notebook. My husband kept this too, she said. It explains how to read the records. He was careful. He knew if anything happened to him, someone else might need to understand. The cowboy took the notebook carefully. That helps. Hours passed slowly. As evening came, the cowboy noticed signs in the dirt near the edge of the land. Fresh tracks. Too fresh. They're closer than I thought, he said quietly. The widow's face tightened, but she stayed calm. What do we do? We don't panic, he said. We stay smart. They waited until nightfall. Then, left the farm quietly. This time, they traveled on foot, leading the horse carefully through rough ground to avoid leaving clear signs. The cowboy chose paths through rocky areas and shallow streams, places where tracks were harder to follow. The widow struggled at times, but she did not complain. Every step she took was driven by the memory of her husband and the years she had spent protecting his work. Late that night, they heard voices in the distance. The cowboy signaled for her to stop. They hid behind rocks and watched as lantern lights moved slowly across the land. They've split up, he whispered, trying to corner us. The widow's heart pounded. But she trusted the cowboy. He waited patiently, watching the movement, listening to the sounds. When the lights moved farther away, he guided her in the opposite direction. They walked for hours, until their legs ached and their strength faded. Just before dawn, they reached a deep ravine with a narrow crossing. The cowboy paused, studying it carefully. This is risky, he said, but it might be our best chance. They crossed slowly, helping each other along the narrow path. On the other side, the cowboy carefully erased signs of their crossing as best he could. When the sun rose, they were hidden deep in the ravine, resting among rocks and shadows. From above, the land looked untouched. For the first time since leaving the town, the widow allowed herself a small smile. We might actually make it, she said. We're not done yet, the cowboy replied, but we're closer. As the day passed, the cowboy noticed something else, his own thoughts changing. This journey was no longer just about helping someone else. It was reminding him of who he used to be, before years of drifting and keeping distance from the world. That evening, as they prepared to move again, the widow spoke. No matter what happens, she said, thank you. You gave me hope. He nodded. Hope is a strong thing, he said. Strong enough to carry us through this. They set out once more under the fading light, knowing the hardest part still lay ahead. But now, they were no longer running blindly. They had a plan, a purpose, and a truth worth protecting. The final stretch of the journey began before sunrise. The sky was pale, slowly changing color, and the air felt calm in a way that made both of them cautious. Calm often came before a storm. The cowboy and the widow moved quietly along a narrow trail that led toward the hills. Beyond those hills was a larger town, one with law offices, record houses, and people who could not be easily silenced. That was where the truth needed to go. They were both tired. Their clothes were dusty, their faces marked by long days and restless nights. Still, neither of them complained. Every step forward felt meaningful now. They were no longer just escaping danger. They were carrying something that mattered. As the sun rose higher, the cowboy slowed his pace. He studied the land ahead and behind them, watching for movement. The widow noticed his caution. You think they're still coming? She asked. Yes, he said, but they're running out of ways to stop us. That gave her some comfort. She held the small bag close to her side. Inside it was very little, just personal items and memories, but the real weight was in the pouch the cowboy carried beneath his coat. The papers had not left his thoughts once since he first opened them. He had read them carefully during their brief rests. They were clear, detailed, and honest. Names, dates, agreements written in careful handwriting. They told a story that powerful people did not want told. By midday, they reached the hills. The climb was slow and difficult. But once they reached the top, the view opened wide. In the distance, they could see the larger town. Smoke rose from chimneys, and the sound of life carried faintly on the wind. The widow stopped and stared. "That's it," she said softly. "That's where my husband hoped these would end up." The cowboy nodded. "Then that's where we're going." As they started down the other side of the hill, they heard a sound behind them. Hooves. More than one horse. The cowboy turned quickly and saw dust rising in the distance. "They found us," the widow said, fear returning to her voice. "Yes," he replied calmly, "but this ends today." He led her off the trail and into a narrow area filled with rocks and thick brush. They moved carefully, keeping low. The sound of hooves grew closer, then slowed. Voices carried through the air. "They can't be far," one voice said. The cowboy waited until the voices moved away slightly. Then he turned to the widow. "Listen to me," he said quietly. "If anything happens, you keep moving. Don't stop. Go straight to town and find the courthouse." She shook her head. "I'm not leaving you. You might have to," he said gently. "This truth matters more than either of us." Before she could respond, the riders appeared at the edge of the rocks. There were 3 of them. Their faces were hard, their expressions certain. "End of the road," one of them said. The cowboy stepped forward, keeping his voice steady. "There's no need for trouble." The man smiled coldly. "You're carrying something that belongs to us." "It doesn't belong to anyone," the cowboy replied. "It's the truth." The men dismounted, spreading out slowly. The widow stood behind the cowboy, her heart pounding. "You had your chance to walk away," another man said. "You should have taken it." The cowboy did not respond. He waited, watching their movements carefully. He knew this moment would come. He had prepared for it in his own quiet way. As the men moved closer, a sound echoed from the trail above. More riders. But these were different. Their posture was firm, their presence official. A local officer from the larger town rode at the front, followed by 2 others. "What's going on here?" the officer called out. The men froze. Their confidence faded quickly. The widow stepped forward, her voice shaking but clear. "I have documents that need to be delivered," she said. "They prove serious wrongdoing." The officer dismounted and approached. He looked at the widow, then at the men who had been chasing them. "Is that so?" The cowboy removed the pouch from his coat and handed it to the officer. "These were written by her husband," he said. "They've been hidden for years." The officer opened the pouch and glanced through the papers. His expression changed as he read. He closed it carefully. "These will be examined," he said, "and everyone involved will be questioned." The men who had chased them said nothing. They knew the fight was over. The officer turned to the widow. "Ma'am, you did the right thing coming forward." Tears filled her eyes, but this time they were not from fear. "Thank you," she whispered. The journey into town felt unreal. People stared as they passed, but the widow walked with her head high. For the first time in years, she felt seen not as someone hiding, but as someone brave. At the courthouse, the papers were officially received. The widow told her story. She spoke of her husband, of the years of silence, of the fear she had lived with. The cowboy stood quietly nearby, offering support without needing recognition. When it was over, the widow stepped outside into the sunlight. The weight she had carried for so long finally began to lift. "I don't know what comes next," she said. "Whatever it is," the cowboy replied, "it'll be free." She smiled at him. "You changed my life." He shook his head. "You changed it yourself. I just helped you carry it for a while." That, They stood together for a moment. Then the cowboy turned toward the road. His horse waited nearby. Calm and ready. "Are you staying?" she asked. "No," he said. "The road's still calling." She nodded, understanding. "Then go with my thanks." He tipped his hat and mounted his horse. As he rode away, he felt lighter than he had in years. He had come into a town looking for ammunition. He left carrying something far greater, a truth delivered, a promise kept, and a reminder that even a passing stranger could change the course of a life. The widow watched until he disappeared down the road. Then, she turned back toward the town, ready to begin again. No longer alone. No longer afraid.